to the poor. That's the Christian duty to the poor. The separation of the sheep and the goats, illustrated in Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46, must be taken seriously by all believers. This passage shows us how much God cares about the poor or the lowly among us. It is also clear that we cannot take from the poor, but we must help the poor that are in the household of faith. God knows who belongs to him. God's children can be detected in how they treat the least of their brethren. Reaching out to Jesus' brethren does not enable a person to attain salvation. That comes only through confession of Jesus Christ. Reaching and helping should be a reaction because of the love that we have received as a result of salvation. This also shows that we recognize this commandment from God. One thing is clear from Matthew chapter 25 verses 31 through 46. True believers cannot live for him or herself. They must have the love of their Father in them. In other words, Jesus Christ must be in you. That's why Jesus said the two greatest commandments, one was love thy neighbor as thyself. And as we look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46, on the banner of the final judgment, let's read it real quick. And it says in verses 31, it says, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne." Verse 32 says, "All nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goat." Verse 33 says, "He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left hand." Verse 34, "Then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in your home." Verse 36 says, "I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. In verse 37, "Then the righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hunger and fed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?'" Verse 40 says, "And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these my brethren and my sisters, you are doing it unto me.'" My God, oh my God, oh my God. In verse 41 it says, "Then the king will turn to those on the left and says, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons.'" Verse 42 says, "I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me anything to drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me in your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Verse 44 says, "Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hunger or thirsty, or stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?' Verse 45 says, "And he will answer, 'I'll tell you the truth. When you refuse to help the least of my brethren and my sisters, you were refusing to help me." My God, what a powerful verse. What a powerful verse. What is it saying here? What is it saying here? It's saying that, my God, that when you help the least of the brethren in the church, when you help the least of the brethren that's in the household of faith, you're helping God. You're not just helping your friend. You're not just helping, you're not just lending a favor to anybody. You're helping God. And so what Jesus is saying here in this final judgment is that you have to look among and help the least among us. And my brothers and sisters, that's why it's so important that we make sure that we don't take from the poor among us, but that we help the poor among us. Let me just go on because I'm on a time limit here, my brothers and sisters. And it says here, because I want you to get all of this. It says in verse 46, "And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." My brothers and sisters, it's so important that we realize. That's why when Jesus said, When you have a party, don't invite rich people. Invite the poor who can't pay you back. God has a love for poor folks. God has a love for people who can't help themselves. God have a love for people who is willing to help these people. Let me just go on. And we must, let me just read this. We must do good for the benefit of others because it's the characteristic of God which is reflected in the life of the believer. The scriptures makes it very clear that while salvation does not depend on good deeds, it does lead them as believers because of the love of God in the believer's heart. The commandment and care for poor believers around us started back in the Old Testament days. God commanded the Israelites to make sure that the poor among them always had something to eat. He commanded them to give to the poor. Let me just read this again. He commanded them to give the poor all their tithes every third year. Let me just read this again. Let me explain this again. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, God commanded the Israelites. He said, listen, every third year, what I want you to do is take your tithes of the entire year and take that tithe and put it in the community where you live and make sure that the poor folks that are there can eat. Make sure they have something to eat. Make sure they have something to drink. Let me go there. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 28 to 29, reading from the New Living Translation. It says here, at the end of every third year, bring the entire tithes of that year harvest and store it in the nearest town. Verse 29 says, give it to the Levites, who will receive no allotment of land among you, as well as the foreigners living among you, the orphans, the widows in your town, so they can eat and be satisfied. And then the Bible said, then the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do and in all that you work. God also told the Israelites to make sure when they reap their fields not to reap the corners. This was another way to make sure that the poor among them always had something to eat. This process was called gleaning or glean. In Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. In Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. It says here, when you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edge of your field, and do not pick up what the harvest drop. Do not pick up what the harvester drop. Verse 10 says, it is the time when you're, let me read this again. Sorry about that. In Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 and 10. Let me read 10 again. It is the same with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grape from the vine, and do not pick up the grapes that fall on the ground. Leave them for the poor, the foreigners living among you. And I, the Lord, said, and I am the Lord your God. In other words, God was commanding them to make sure not only to give the poor among them every third year the entire tithe, but also to make sure that during the other years that these folks had something to eat. And the only way those folks would have something to eat is because when they farm and they plant their crops, God told them to make sure that they only reap from the middle of the field and leave the corners of the field so the poor would come. And so they'll always have something to eat. My brethren, my brothers and sisters, God has a love for the poor. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 19 to 22. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 19 to 22, it says, when you are harvesting your crops and forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, don't go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do. In verse 20 says, when you beat the olive from your olive tree, don't go over the broth twice. Leave the remaining olive for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Verse 21 says, when you gather grapes in your vineyard, don't glean the vines after they are picked. Leave the remaining grapes for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Verse 22 says, remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. That is why I am giving you this command. And my brothers and sisters, God, I'm telling you that God loves the poor so much. He cares so much for the poor. That's one of the reasons why, my brothers and sisters, I cannot believe that God really is pleased with some of the things that goes on when we steal from the poor. And my brothers and sisters, you can look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46 for yourself. Read it in any translation you want to read it in. And my brothers and sisters, if we're not doing this, if we're not doing what God asked us to do, how can we go to heaven? Because God's love for the poor is so deep, it must be a concern for the New Testament believer. It is a Christian duty to help the poor among us, especially those that are on the household of faith. God bless, and tune in again. Thanks again for listening to the Simple